we'll give everybody just a minute before we get started. So I think for those who saw the updates, and so we're going to go through 2 items here for grooming, and so really want to get the basics of search covered. So we'll talk about that a bit, and even have Salma go through some of the latest work that she's doing in that area. But the idea there is to create a very, very basic search. Nothing fancy with autocomplete, nothing fancy with even pagination yet. But the idea is to be able to test the current APIs and show and display something that would pull pull the catalog data that you would expect. And so the same spirit that we're talking about and had done with checkout, but apply that to search, and that makes great fodder for someone to pick up in the new approach we're taking in terms of kind of self-sufficient but also business-oriented stories. And so everyone's going to be purchase history, and so we're going to cover that a bit. And so again, same philosophy there. Obviously, now that we've got authentication, that opens the door to some new experiences. Purchase, otherwise known as order history, is a great one. And so we'll go through that a bit. Goals there, not necessarily again to go right into and then even pulling up an order details screen yet. That would come next. But to be able to retrieve that information in some meaningful way, that would be the beginnings of what Salmia has created to date. And so that's really the goal for today, and that's what we're hoping to cover. And yeah, that's it. So, any questions before we get started?
Actually, yeah, I did have a quick question.
Please, yeah.
So I was just having some issues with the Circle CI integration on my latest pull request, the account creation one specifically. I saw something in the PWA chat about master being broken somehow. I was wondering if there was something going on there. I didn't know if it was related.
Yeah, that's a great question, too. I believe James is on the call as well. James, can you help with that question?
Hold on.
Maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now better?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Blue Jeans is a nightmare on my audio driver. I have no idea what's going on. So yeah, I can speak to that. Your pull request is 293, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I looked at it, and it looks like you need to update your package JSON, which is a new requirement. I recognize. Sorry, your package lock JSON, which is a new requirement I recognize. What I would say is the easiest thing for you to do is to pull in latest master and then do the whole clean and rebuild the environment. And then if there's changes that you see to package JSON, commit those changes. And that's one thing that I'm actually going to talk about today briefly is those changes. Some of it is also going to come in the form of documentation of a new process that we're rolling out for a little bit more formality. In your case, though, the reason that it broke is that I changed Circle CI to dramatically simplify it since we were trying to integrate this Greenkeeper thing, and it sucked. And we're going to do something else. But when I was trying to integrate that, there were a whole bunch of extra configuration tweaks that I had to do, and they had consequences, one of them being that you couldn't use some of the features that guarantee consistency in CI. Now we can use those features, which means when we run an npm install and your dependencies don't match precisely what's in package lock, it'll die. Were you able to actually click the details link and see what was going on in Circle CI?
Yeah, it did say the package lock and the package.json weren't matching up. And when I was trying to run npm install just on the root, I was getting some recursive, infinite error where it kept trying to install the same package over again. I think I probably just need to do a complete clean install, like you said.
So do a clean install and pull or rebase completely on master. What that'll do is get you to the changes that we've made. One change we've made is that the Lerna repo is no longer bootstrapping every time you reinstall. I switched from a Lerna workflow that requires that, where you declare these dependencies and then it sort of cross-links them and detects them. I changed it from that to used Lerna convert to kind of hard code file-based dependencies into the packaged JSONs. And so that means that now NPM can cross-link by itself, and Lerna is responsible just for topo sorting of the build. So long story short, when you pull master, you're going to see all of the package locks in the package directories themselves are gone. Package locking is now the responsibility of the root, and the dependencies that are common have all been pulled down to the root. The only dependencies you'll see in the individual packages are runtime deps or dev deps that need a command, that have a command line command that they expose. That's a little bit of a change, so make sure that when you pull that in, that you do a fully clean install, which is just as simple as running npm or npm run clean and then npm install, and then just make sure that you run through the whole test suite before pushing. That's it.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm sorry that I didn't roll that information out prior to merging the pull requests, but hey, we're
no, it's no
we're
problem.
a ragtag team of misfits. Okay, I speak for
Great,
myself.
no, that's a good question. Any other questions before we get started? I know we cover a lot of this in Slack, but it's also a rare opportunity to address some of these things in real time. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, as promised, we're going to be covering the basics of search and the basics of a purchase history here. And so, so for those of you taking a look at it in advance, so the idea here is to cover, again, some extension around the Venya theme, right? And so as you'd expect, we've made some good progress on browse, but we're going to need a search. And so the story here is follows. The idea, again, as a shopper, you want to be able to search for products on this Venya storefront, again, using live data, using basic keywords like hoodie that I could use to make an informed purchase. And so what would that imply? Well, of course, it would imply updates to the Venya header, and we'll get some ideas around that. It also implies that this could be and would be initiated by a keyboard. Again, the idea of using a keyboard entry to commit, again, the details themselves, of course, coming through by way of UX. But what are the assumptions? The assumptions here are things like filtering, sorting, not part of this first effort. Of course, every great search has something like that, but we want to iterate on that one. Those will be forthcoming stories, but those shouldn't surprise you. So the development and build will be done with that coming down the road. Pagination, which we covered a little bit last week. We'll continue to refine that, but not necessarily part of this, as well as autocomplete. Again, autocomplete in its own right is going to be a pretty sizable story. And so we'll do that one in the future, but essentially the basics of what we'll create here, which is really just the search results page. And of course, where the API is covered, we use as much as we can around GraphQL. We may be lucky on this one, but fall back to the rest where appropriate. So what are some of the tasks? These are the ones I've identified, but I'm definitely going to need your help on this one. The idea here, again, is that we want to retrieve product catalog data by keyword via those APIs. We want to identify, again, some of those future considerations for the faceted navigation, faceted inner filtering that would occur, and then just the implementation itself. And of course, Mr. Kalkman here keeps me honest to make sure that we do account for testing and documentation as appropriate. So what we create here, we would tee up as documentation in a forthcoming sprint. So that's the basics here. What I did want to do is turn this over to Salmi a bit. She's got the latest on the Envision prototype, and so she'll walk us through the visual up here, and we can talk through that. And once we arrive at a consensus, we can after the fact kind of add a link specifically to this in the story so that it's self-sustaining. So yeah, let me unshare here for just a moment.
Good morning, everyone. So I guess I need a little bit more clarity on what we want to do with this first version of search. I'll show you what I have, and then we can figure out how we want to bear it down.
Yep.
So the original thought was that, that was...
Envision is so responsive.
Yeah. The original thought was that if the user does start on the home page, that the search is already open.
Right.
And I was thinking it would just be a simple, if you tap on the search icon, this could be confusing. I don't know. If you tap on the search icon again, the search bar disappears or goes back up. We kind of need to discuss the interaction of how that bar appears and disappears, I guess. So if you did then enter a search term, what I have is it lists sort of the keyword things first, followed by, some product suggestions. And at least on my device, it does go behind the keyboard and you can scroll that part of the screen to look at, a certain optimal number of search results. I do have ratings and product thumbnails and things on here. Need to know how much of that is, if we're just going to start with the text stuff. And then I guess I did have a pagination for search results as opposed to just open-ended discovery on a categories page. But to start with, we can just do the show more here as well and not worry about the pagination for now.
Yep.
And I guess we're not worrying about filtering and sorting for now either.
Correct. So yeah, I think so. In the spirit, I think of really showing what good and great is on this, and I'd love to keep this in mind at the epic level. So you'll see the story we have here created as kind of the master for what this will be. But and Sami and I are going to talk about this a little bit this afternoon, so that we don't need 12 versions of the same reality as this becomes iterative. I mean, that's great, but it does create a bit of a few extra tasks on our side. By kind of pulling back and creating a very simple search, we wouldn't necessarily have that autocomplete that you would have there. I'm sure it would be great, but that becomes a little bit more work from that. It would be initiated and then again show a very similar experience that you've got here, minus the ratings, which I believe that doesn't even exist yet in terms of API coverage. And I like the idea of show more, at least for the time being, until we button up pagination. Even then, even if that becomes an issue, we can even push that off to a future sprint. Although that would create some interesting cases for if you let's say you use the letter A in a search and the entire catalog, it comes down, and that's not awesome either for that. So that's kind of what we're thinking. Super straightforward. I do like the idea of kind of pulling down from the header, opening this search box, and then just initiating a basic search results as part of that. So to me, that feels the most minimum to where we would start from. And then beyond that, yes, we would add all the different details that we've covered.
On the search results page, the way that I have it here is that the search bar is still open. And I feel like we could go either way on this, is to sort of save the state of it but not display it on the search results page and have the user summon it if they're going to. But I felt it would be a little bit more user forward if we were to leave it there and then allow them to dismiss it if they really didn't want to use it anymore. But would welcome some thoughts on that as well.
I like that idea personally. I'm certainly open to feedback. I like the idea of being able to kind of go quickly through a couple permutations. Let's say you misspelled hoodies with a Y versus an IE, and you want to kind of quickly go through some of those experiences. I think that makes the most sense for now. And and part of what we're doing here also is conducting user research as part of this. Let's make sure, especially as this is built, are there some refinements here which are fairly low-hanging fruit that we need to make as we harden these experiences. And so I think that's probably a good start, but I mean, I could certainly be convinced as well.
Any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple. So by default, are we searching by like categories? So when you search, is it going to bring up pants, or are we just searching all products in general?
It'll just bring up pants. That's the only functionality.
Okay, in the future, is it going to be something where, like, if you click through categories to pants and then search, would it default to that category in your search results? Is that maybe a future consideration?
It definitely certainly could be. I mean, the more we can reduce effort on the part of the shopper, the better, because they've already indicated that they're within a certain category and they're looking for maybe, let's say they're in pants and they type periwinkles for whatever reason. It would only show them pants in blue or shades of blue. That would certainly be nice. However, I don't know that I've specifically gone looking for that experience on websites. I've typically entered more sort of clothing related search terms. I could explore that and see how other people do it right now. If that's something that shoppers expect to happen, or if they just expect it to be more of a general search no matter where they are in the site, because it is located in the header, right? It's not on the page. So there's not an indication that it's that category specific. It seems like more of a global item from a visual perspective. So that's something we may need to put in front of a few people to see, but I can definitely do some research on that and get back to you on how we may want to plan for that in the future.
Okay, that sounds great.
Perfect. So good questions there. Any other questions or feedback? I'm pulling the story up here again just to make sure that we've got this covered. This is easy. Last time we opened up search, it took 2 grooming sessions, and so I think again, search is an easy thing to overcomplicate. And my hopes for this one is that it can be very basic. We've actually seen some interesting React-based work even internally that has pulled this off fairly, straightforward. And I think the work is going to be as we get into the scenarios we just discussed. I think that's fine. We want to refine those before we get too far, but we want to pull some of these scenarios with live data. We'd love to see this come into the working version of Venya here as soon as we can. So that's the hope. So okay. Well, if we're clear on what needs to be done for this one, again, I'll work with Salmia on the right way. And again, you guys see here to link to the right concept here. We want to be dynamic with what we've got and what we're showing here. Assuming everything we just saw, do we feel like we're in a good place to make some estimates?
I have one more question. It says as the last assumption that it's going to utilize REST instead of GraphQL. What doesn't GraphQL have that REST has at this point?
A lot. One of the reasons, yeah, I mean, so it has search of a sort, right? Like you can search products,
Right.
but you want the search to kind of have the heterodox like results. I'm sorry, that's a $20 word where I'm looking for a 10-cent one. You want it to have multiple types inline in the result set. You want it to be able to load categories as well as products, and so that's what GraphQL doesn't yet support. Category tree, for instance, does not let you just search through the tree for categories. Right now, the query only lets you specify a category and then walk the tree by running recursive queries, which is just untenable. So, there are a couple of things you could do, but I would say what's simplest is to use the GraphQL API and just load products and get that working. And then because that immediately confers some value, then perhaps during that you can think about ways to make it a more generic search so that it's not entirely bound to products and their particular data shape. So you'd have a selector so that any given component has a method that translates it into a search result shape or maps it into a search result shape. And then, you can just do products and we'll accept that story, I would say. It would just get, iterated later to include other stuff.
Okay, so does that mean we can remove that third assumption?
I would leave it, but because it's not actually an acceptance criterion. What it is a guideline for if there's any data that you absolutely need to complete the story that you can't get. But you're perfectly free to take a path through the story that satisfies its basic user story premise that doesn't use the REST API. That is okay to do.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Dealer's choice, as they would say. No, that's a good one. And again, remember, if kind of stepping back to what are hopeful and expected outcomes of this, as we find cases where GraphQL isn't covered or necessarily working the way we need, it's the perfect opportunity for us to then work with them. I know the Comrade folks are going back and forth kind of between the two different teams here, and they can bring that fairly quickly and get that on their board as well, which is great. And so that's part of what we're doing here, and part of why we want to make early progress, even if it's just maybe it's 20% of the intended vision of some of the UX work that Sami and those guys have done. So, anyways, that's that. How are we feeling about estimates? The silence means I feel like we're ready. Now the question though is, how big is this thing? What are we feeling about this?
Again, bearing in mind that you want to give a generous estimate for the minimum viable thing, I would guide you guys again to think about just doing products for now. And that reduces the plumbing obligation. Now you just got to think about the UI, and you want to just go use Kent C. Dodd's component for rendering autocompletes. Plug that in. If you've not seen it before, it's pretty nice.
So James,
It's called
you saying this is a
downshift.
1 now?
I'm not saying it's a 1. I'm saying that I want, as people think about this, I want them to think
Just
about
kidding. Sorry, just a little estimate humor.
Yeah, no. When you downshift, like on a curve, I don't know if you've ever played Mario Kart with manual transmission mode, but you don't go to 1. You go to like 2.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Okay. And I would call this, for myself, I don't want to just dictate it, but I would call this a 5.
I was feeling that too, especially when you mentioned that we have to think about how to genericize the GraphQL product query to a search results shape of some sort. That seems like it might be a bit more work to it, but otherwise it seems pretty.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. I don't mean genericize the query because the query is in the container. I mean maybe genericize the API to the search component that you have so that it's not expecting a thing with a product shape.
Right.
Now, that being said, I think we're still a 5 over here at Burgreen.
Cool. I would say, at least from a product standpoint, this feels relatively sized to others that we've declared as 5s in this category. And so that in terms of scope and size, again, not being the person who's going to be building this, but it feels right for what that's worth.
Agreed.
All right. Notion to make this a 5 then. So any objections? All right. Very good. We'll make it so. Excellent. So let's go ahead and update this one. Again, not a lot of changes, and I think we had a really good discussion on what this is and what this isn't. Again, we'll add the link to the prototype here shortly afterwards, which will match exactly what we talked about. Quick note on process. You may notice a couple changes here in the pipelines, and so if you are familiar with the GraphQL project, this will look extremely familiar for this. And so one of our hopes, and James will cover a little bit on some of the work that's being done on the releases themselves, but we want to make our work easier to pick up and declaring things that are indeed ready to start. And so that could mean anybody here, anybody elsewhere in the community, or even internally, can pick this up and start making progress on that. And so we're still going to bound ourselves by the sprints, still have the cadence and the ceremonies that we do, but we want to make these a bit more autonomous than where we were before. It worked quite well, but with the scale that we're continuing to get, many thanks to the folks here, but also with the rise and the inclusion of a feature team that's going to be joining us here internally in a week. This will help us quite a bit. And so in this example, we've groomed it. It was ready to groom. It's ready to start now. But we might run into a situation. Again, you'll see a few of these stories here for Jimmy where we're hitting some roadblocks in the coverage, right? And so that puts it in an investigation. But ultimately, once that's picked up, we're making good progress and good progress. We've consolidated review and QA, which there were some questions on the differences between the two there. And then we'll continue to build a queue of, and this does need to be updated with a few of the newer ones there. But the items that need to be merged, right? We've got a lot of great work that's out there. We are addressing things like master, and again, James is looking at a release strategy here. But we'll clearly see the items that have been completed, but just need to be merged after they've gone through review. And then once they're merged, they're done. So hopefully that's just pretty straightforward. But just a quick note on process as we scale things out a little bit, both from a release standpoint, but also a backlog standpoint as well. Any questions on that before we switch gears then into purchase history? All right, very good. And again, also part of the reason here too is to be consistent amongst the other active higher profile projects in the community. So the idea is that you're contributing to one, you might be contributing to others, so this may make your lives a bit easier as you understand how things work. So that's what we're going for. So let's talk about purchase history, otherwise known as order history. Again, I'll walk through the description here, walk through what we're talking about from a story standpoint, and then I'll hand it over to Sami in a bit and kind of walk us through what that looks like as the paint is drying with the story that she's completed for this particular sprint. And so this one in particular shouldn't surprise you too much. Again, we're going to go with a very minimal approach, but as a shopper, I want to find previous purchases on Venya by order number so that I can make a repeat purchase, which is an M2. Need also, but also request help from customer service. You see an order, you have a question about it, you should be able to pick up the phone and talk about that order. And so we've got some really interesting things here happening around authentication. So you're going to be authenticated to pick this up. You've got to be able to pull and understand real order numbers, which is great. And of course, layout and the data beyond that as grouped by some of the things you'll see in the prototype. So what are the assumptions? It's going to require a level of authentication. Again, we're going to use Veronica on this one as well to access the data. We'd like to try to take a stab at grouping. You'll see this in the UX, the idea of the last 30 days and kind of earlier are desirable but noted stretch goals. If we can't get there, if that adds a little bit too much complexity, that's okay. If we really want to make this more minimal, we can just have a straight list of the recent orders placed. That's okay. Order details will be handled separately, and so we don't have to worry about linking on this one. Simply a hashtag will do in your link. For this, we'll cover that as a separate story as that gets refined. And things like filtering, much like what we just covered in search, is going to be considered in the future. Of course, this should be built with that, knowing that is going to be in mind, and that will be more of a time-based search, especially in cases where there are lots and lots of orders, and a bit of our boilerplate on the REST versus GraphQL. We'll use GraphQL as far as we can, look at some of the base cases, but fall back where we need. In terms of the tasks, fairly straightforward. Again, some discovery activities to start playing around with this. Start thinking about some of the future considerations. Note that this might have been copied and need to make a change to the basic search piece to this, and then also and on the testing and documentation for this as well. And so once we make those updates, that's what we've got here. So those are those are the basics again of really just creating a list of the orders that were placed by the accounts on this one that I think builds off very nicely some of the recent progress from the bargaining folks that have been built that is expected to be seen soon. So, any questions on this from I guess a verbal perspective before we switch gears then to Sami to show you what it looks like?
This might be covered in the mocks when we get to it, but does this story just cover the list of past orders, or is it the list of past orders and viewing a past order?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part? List of past orders and what else did you say?
Is it the list of past orders and viewing an individual past order, or is it just that list?
The design for viewing the individual order exists. If I'm not sure if we want to include it in this effort or if that's going to be a separate one.
I mean, as a product person, sure, I would love both. Of course, I'd take it, eat it too, but we would separate that as a separate story because theoretically, you could create this, be informed, handle things offline, kind of the spirit of what we're talking about in some of the password reset scenarios per se, but then have this have a follow-up story. Likely not get to it until probably next week, but then handle that once we feel good about the design there that would give you a link to the details of the order itself. But the design has come along pretty well for that. We've had some early concepts for quite some time there. But yeah, this is just the listing. But good question.
Is that my cue then?
I think so. I think the silence is the cue here. So let me stop sharing and switch gears to Samia.
All right. So there's a little bit of I have a little bit of a dilemma here. There are two approaches we could take to purchase history, and of course, I've not had the opportunity to test this yet. I will show you both, and then we can decide which way we want to go. The first way is based on, this is actually the second iteration of it, and is based on internal feedback. And the approach it takes is to display orders in groups, items that were ordered together as a unit, and then you dig into the order to see individual items with the options to purchase again, and other things like order details and so on. So this is the signed in or authenticated version of my account. You would go through purchase history to a list of orders. Now, one of the problems, whoops, there's a glitch on the screen, never mind. One of the problems that people might have with grouped orders is not having visibility into what items were purchased. So in order to kind of help with that, I went with sort of the mini thumbnails of the items, a maximum of 4, and then a little label that says how many more might exist if there are in excess of 4 items in that order. Now, if you did click on the dots similar to what we have in MiniCart that shows you options, you would have, if it is an active order in shipment, you could track the order or you could view order details. And then when you did choose to view order details, you would have, the date, you would have the individual items with the opportunity to buy again, share, or review. You could track it and see the payment details and order summary. That's approach one. Approach two is the way Amazon currently does it. And it's not in the prototype yet. I removed it because it was getting confusing for me to manage. But essentially what they do is they have a list of individual products. When you dig into a product purchase, it shows you what else was purchased with that product. So it's sort of the opposite of what we saw, which is it just shows you a list. Then you go into it and it shows you the option to buy again. And then when you say view order details, hang on. I guess I got rid of that screen, but essentially it would be the same screen.
Right.
With a little bit of modification. I kind of see why Amazon does it this way. I think people have a far greater likelihood of remembering an item that they purchased as opposed to maybe an order. But I think that's where the thumbnails may help. It certainly keeps the parent-child structure a little bit more logical when you go from a grouped order to an individual item as opposed to the other way around. I'm not necessarily tied to one or the other. I just need some guidance on which side of the wall we want to land on to go. And I will definitely be testing this. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet.
Yep.
So it just depends on which might be easier to change, I guess. I don't know. Like if we started with a grouped approach and went individual, and then it turned out that the individual order approach was in fact the more easily understood or the better experience when tested, would it be relatively easy to flip that, or would it be a huge amount of effort is the question.
You waiting for me?
I'm here.
Sorry, Zetlin?
Well, I was asking if you're waiting for me. I wanted to open it to the field, but I don't want the silence to go on too long.
I'm waiting for feedback, and if you have feedback, speak up.
Not yet. Let me take another look.
Okay.
So just from us looking at it, we think the individual one, Amazon style, makes a bit more sense and would be easier to implement.
Okay.
Just from a customer or user perspective, if I'm looking at my purchase history, I'm just thinking, I want to make sure I'm seeing all those items. The thing that concerns me is the little like +4 button or whatever. If I'm not seeing my item exactly, I'm not going to remember which cart it's in. Me personally, I don't make organized carts or anything, so that's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you. Also, in a retail fashion type of vertical, I think there is a possibility that someone might purchase 15 items at a time and maybe return some of them later. I think it then makes it easier when you do have them broken up by product because it's an immediate and really clear visual.
Yep.
And then you make less about what else you purchase. Because if you are going to return something, I mean, I don't know that there's specific discounts on, grouped returns or anything like that. It would just be whatever you return.
Yep.
So I think that I'm kind of inclined to go that way. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed the internal feedback I had received and made sure that we kind of covered both approaches. But I'm comfortable proceeding with the Amazon sort of model of going with individual products.
Yep. Yeah, I would second that, and that's coming from someone who challenged probably the initial thinking, knowing that Amazon has a different style of purchase than probably what we would want in a reference storefront. I do like the simplicity of the item-focused approach. It doesn't mean we couldn't come back and maybe even suggest a filter or a toggle to go back to an order-based approach well into the future.
Right.
But I do like that, and again, some of the insights we just heard earlier of could this be a little bit easier to start off with? I do like that, right? And so that again gets back into, is this something we could start off with? It's simpler from an experience standpoint. visually at least, should test well. And yeah, we always reserve the right to pick this back up at a later date. But I'm inclined to keep this one simple for now, which is kind of where we started, and then put on hold with what we've got the order-based approach until we can think of a toggle and/or the research itself may show it differently.
What we could do is on the individual product card in the initial page, they shipped with 4 other items.
Yep. That's
just
true.
to indicate that it wasn't purchased as a one-off.
Yep.
It was a part of the group order. Maybe that would be valuable. I don't know.
Yep. Yeah, for the purpose of this one, I like that, but I think even keeping it as a list of items, that alone I think would be a successful start, and then we can iterate on that.
Okay.
But again, speaking as someone who challenged it initially, I do like with where we started on this one.
Okay. Any other feedback from anybody else?
We good.
All
So
right.
this is more of a future. I said this is more of a future consideration one, but presumably the benefit that you have from the view my order is that related to kicking off things like returns or seeing, I think this is more common in the EU side, like seeing the invoice that purchase as well.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, that was the initial thinking in the feedback I gave Sammy about a week or so ago, which was it represents a moment in time. And so again, we're not talking about, at least again with the reference storefront, type of throughput and the type of purchase frequency that you would see with some of that. And so there may be merit to that. Again, also merit to the moment in time around customer service and returns, but we could be overcomplicating it a bit too, at least for the spirit of this one. But I think research could prove this out a little bit. And again, if we create some for the larger cases, if we create some experiences that help address that as an option or a choice, then I think that's fine too, but probably not necessarily for MVP. So I was right there with you though. Okay.
Thank you.
Indeed.
And then just to clarify the workflow for the screens, there's been some questions about it. What you guys saw on Envision here is our internal working copy. So what happens is once I discuss changes with the team here and we're in a comfortable place to sort of share it out, we put it in the shared prototype that you all have access to. The link to which I had pasted maybe a few days ago in the community engineering Slack for the PWA channel. So if there's ever any confusion or if you thought you saw something that you're not seeing anymore, just feel free to reach out to me and ask, and hopefully I'll be able to clarify and I didn't just goof up.
Never. No, and this is a perfect example where we're ending a sprint now with the completion of this work. And so in many ways that's very efficient, but it also, we also have to be, crisp on version control on this one as well, which is good. So yeah.
And Rowan, just to close the loop with you, you had provided some feedback on the quantity selector for the cart item. I did implement that. I'm happy to send that to you offline. I went with the defaults for Android and iOS. And with the Android one, I checked about 3 or 4 people's devices, and it all seemed to be the same. But I did have questions if it was done in any other way. So hopefully, if you have time, you could provide some feedback on that. I could send those to you via email or something.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments based on the direction we're going here, the item-based approach for purchase history? All right. Well, you guys know what the question will be following this. How are we feeling about an estimate?
Let's do it.
All right. Who'd like to get us started?
Bargain's thinking of 5.
You guys are more than just Bargreen. Like, you're not a collective. The more individual estimates we have, the more it smooths the function of estimation.
Okay, well, Paul from Bargreen thinks it's a 5.
All right. So Did he overrule either of you gentlemen?
No, Jonathan from Bar Green also was thinking 5.
All right. I think it's a 5-2 for what it's worth. I'm inclined to maybe lift it up to 8 because order data is inevitably complicated, and one of the things you'll probably observe first is that the REST API gives it to you in an extremely inconvenient way. So I would say it's between a 5 and an 8 for me, just for the purposes of safety. I would estimate it as an 8 for the velocity of this team.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at the results from the REST API data, but I mean, if it isn't like super convenient and easy to sort through, then an 8, that definitely adds time on. So I could definitely see an 8 in that case.
Yeah, I'd rather be more conservative on this one. Orders, we haven't played as much in orders as we have with products, and so yeah, if we come in as a 5 on that, fantastic. But this would be a good estimate. I'd feel better about a larger estimate here for what it's worth as well. All right, motion to make this an 8. Any objections? Any other questions or comments?
We don't have a Jimmy to say pessimistic things to us at present. So yeah, I think 8 is the safest.
Very good. Yeah, I'm incorporating his pessimism in the estimate. So
good.
Good. Excellent. We're sorted, guys. So again, spirit of the process, we're going to bring this over. Done. Ready to start. So
Yay.
Yay. We've got 2 of these done.
Wonderful.
And faster than I'd expected today. And so that's really all we have. We certainly can go into the depths of order details. You guys can start to see the beginnings of that, but I'd rather be coming into the Grooming a little bit more prepared. So I think we can queue that up for next time around, giving Sally a little bit of time to kind of sit and finish some of the things we just talked about as well. But that all said, any other questions, comments? Yeah, James, did you want to talk a little bit about releases? Do you think that would be valuable for the team?
I think it would be valuable, and not everyone who is maybe relevant to this discussion is on the call, but I'm going to follow up with them separately. So I'll speak briefly because I really want to make sure this isn't just me talking, but that this makes it into documentation in the README on PWA Studio, the repository, in the wiki, and enforced or at least encouraged by Danger and our CI process. And it's this. We're going to switch to a model called Git ship. It's a variant of Git flow that is simplified, that does not have a develop branch, even though there is currently a develop branch. That was an experiment. We'll be out merging everything from there. And part of the reason we selected it is that the originator of the idea of Git ship is part of the Magento community and is willing to volunteer his time to help us get it set up the best way. I think this is good use time because he's already done the thinking about it for us. And then we can obviously adjust it as we see fit and bounce it off, and we're not married to it. What this means practically for you guys is that we're going to start opening pull requests against a release branch named after the upcoming release of PWA Studio semantically version. All of the packages will have the same release number like Babel. We're changing it to fixed. And we're going to have a change log that is automatically, nope, don't want to use that word, automatically maintained by the commit messages that you guys provide. So probably the biggest change for you guys is that we're going to want to adhere to a conventional commit message format. It's something that's done in a lot of projects, and it's okay to mess it up. There's utilities to help you go through and make one, and you can, while you're working sort of locally, you can squash and fix it later. But if you do this, then we're going to have a really super cool professional change log that we don't have to maintain ourselves. Lastly, the way that we're going to manage releases, first of all, is we're going to kind of retroactively take the existing PWA Studio code base and call it 0.x. And we're going to issue a point release kind of at the tip of master once we've got some basic stuff integrated and working. Some PRs from Bargreen, some from others are going to make it in because they pertain to the existing setup. And then the sea change that we're going to make is that it's no longer a theme. It relies on an upward server, and that's going to be kind of the centerpiece of 1.0. So you'll see a release 1.0 branch that large changes are going to start getting merged into so that we can accelerate. All this stuff will be documented, and that's it. Questions? I'm not hiding from your questions. I dropped my pen.
Sounds like it's pretty straightforward. Yeah. So I think,
Great,
I think the documentation, what you've created, will help around that. And I know there are others involved and others who would be interested in hearing about this as well. But I think good stuff. This is under the same theme as the backlog and the grooming that we've done here too. We're continuing to get a lot more contribution, which is great. We're continuing to get help internally as well, which is great. And so scale is a big part of that. So the release strategy as well as what we're doing on the story is a big part of that. So thank you.
Of course.
All right. Well, any other questions or anything else that we wanted to cover before we break? It's okay if we break a few minutes early, but I do want to make sure that we've got everybody's questions and everything else covered before we go.
I had one that's kind of a long-term architectural discussion, so maybe just like a starter to point me at some docs or to cover at another session. What's the consideration for offline functionality at the moment?
Right now, we are not considering the stateful queued offline mode features that we will want to be part of MVP. We are confident that we'll be able to integrate those into Workbox by using its middleware structure. But presently, we're using a service worker wrapper plugin that simply delegates down to Workbox with a couple of bits of auto-generated config, like where the manifests should go and how to prefix a domain. We have that abstraction there so that we can rev Workbox under it, and so that we can add things without being obtrusive to people's existing Webpack configs. So that's the place for it to go naturally. It's not there yet, and it's not backlogged. And I'm excited to do it, but I think it's fairly large. Candidly, one of the reasons that we're not pursuing it is that there's a lot of Venia to get done, and the people who would perhaps have the strongest JS skills and take the most interest in doing something cool like that are other directed. So there you have it. However, with caching and the stuff you get from Workbox for free, you get catalog offline close to free, But we probably would have to do some tweaks. Do you have any suggestions?
It only came to mind because of things like order history are prime candidates for very easy caching, since they're very much kind of one-off writes. I do think that offline catalog, I think, is tempting, but I do worry that there's hidden complexity around stock availability, pricing, and so on, where you want to be very sensitive about things like invalid items being in the cache. But yeah, order history would just be a great one for kind of going, yep, always available offline. Worst case, you don't see your most recent order because your phone hasn't connected in that time.
You're right. And, that brings to mind that there ought to be a way to positively identify ahead of time or while you're working in a way that is machine readable, views that pertain to essentially write-only data. If there's a way for us to just quickly tag that, like, oh, then the cache can find it. Separately, the way to sort of address volatility in the midst of catalog information, like stock availability, is something we've been talking and thinking about a while. Salmia and I spoke about this like 2 Magento offices ago, it feels like. Do you remember that conversation, Salmia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, If you have arrived at some more definition on it, please feel free to talk about it. I have not, but I just remember we discussed we're definitely going to need to think about what that UX is beyond just having a global indicator of offline mode, to have some way of showing that data is volatile in an intuitive way. It seems like new ground. So, if you've thought more about it, be my guest to talk about it now. But, point is, it's something that's in our mind circulating.
Yep.
And also what's really valuable to have in offline mode, what are people most likely to want to do. I mean, the thing about the fashion retail vertical is that they're not critical purchases intrinsically speaking. It's not like medication or something else that has a sense of urgency or maybe even importance in most contexts associated with them.
Okay, so sounds like someone's never been to a wedding.
I have, but I tend not to buy anything new for them.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, while it would be really cool, I think it would require a little bit of thought to make it so attractive that people would want to use that functionality offline because it exists, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said around the checkout experience as we refine that even more to make sure something is completed as intended. Of course, making sure the things that are not intended, maybe you have buyer's remorse in that time that you come back online. We got to think about that, right? And so those are financial commitments, right? And so I think there's some good work there. We've got some hypotheses, but let's cue some. We'll cue that up from a UX standpoint in a future sprint, and perhaps take that offline. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like there's a fairly hefty discovery piece around there, and I'm happy to loop in people for Workbox discussions on that as well.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
That'd be great.
That would be fantastic.
Perfect. Excellent. Anything else before we break? All right. Well, very good. Well, hey, listen, thank you again, as always, for your time, your help, your feedback, and participation. It's always inspiring. Every week we come to these. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, you know where to find us. But thank you again, and then have a great weekend, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
All right.
good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.